Hey guys, welcome back. Um, this will be the recap for week 5 of the Automotive Weekly Waveforms. Thanks for joining us. Looks like there's quite a few of you guys in there already. We're running a couple minutes behind, but it's all right. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm gonna, like I normally do, I'm gonna cover some of the homework submissions for week number 5. This week's assignment was the relative compression check using voltage or an amp clamp. If you're using voltage, you inverted the waveform and turned on AC coupling so that we could blow it up and make it look very similar to an amp clamp waveform. We also had a sync channel off of the ignition system somewhere. Whatever cylinder was easiest to get to. The post that I put up was on a Subaru on cylinder number 1. I just used a coil on plug wand and stuck it down there. And then in our video that I did last Sunday, I was around one of the plug wires, and that was a waste fire system. So we had a look at the different peaks between our waveform. So that was kind of the overview of what the waveforms were. We will start, and I'm going to go in reverse order. So I'm going to go from the early submissions and work our way back up. I know the other days we went the other way around. What do you guys think of the sweater?
Did they comment on it?
I'm not sure. Yeah, they did. Found this at the thrift store when Valerie was shopping. She said she's gonna sell it, but I think I might keep it.
You're not gonna keep it.
She says I'm not gonna keep it. That's all right. If I keep it because it's white, it'll just get ruined. I'll destroy it. Okay, let's move over here. The first one at 6:39 a.m. was Doug Wilson. He got an early jump on it. He had a 2010 Super Subi. Yellow is ignition, green is AC filtered at the starter, supply stud, blue is an amp clamp around the battery, negative cable. And I think his blue is inverted as well. So he has a sync channel right here. We can see, he even put an overlay on there. Firing order is 1, 3, 2, 4. So we have 1, 3, 2, 4. They all look relatively even without the grid lines turned on. I can't tell 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they're even. And then I did find it at the thrift store. There's another pulse right here. I'm not sure, Doug, if this was a waste fire system. I don't think 2010 had coil on plug, but it might have. Somewhere in there is when they started doing it. Colorado fashion. Nah, I'll probably just wear it for this one stream. I'll give it back to Valerie. Otherwise, I will ruin it. I'll ruin it just walking across the house. All of his peaks looked fairly even. He has another capture of what it looked like when he was zoomed all the way out, just showing how long he cranked it for. Good job, Doug Wilson. And then I think he has a video on here of where to find the firing order in Mitchell, because I mentioned in my video that I normally go to Identifix and search it that way. I find it faster, but Doug Wilson's way through Mitchell was pretty quick as well. Colorado has its ups and downs. Today was very, very windy, like 40-mile-an-hour winds and some sideways snow and rain and stuff. And it was like 40 degrees, but tomorrow might be 70. So you just never know. This was one that I submitted on another Subaru. This was a 2011 Forester dual overhead cam. This one had coil on plug. And this was the F-Series motor, so the timing chain motor. And I did a couple tests on this one just because I was getting ready to do some work on it. I wanted to verify that the starter was okay, the battery was okay, and see if we had any issues. So I have some voltage drop. This is some of the earlier testing that we did. And then here is my relative compression check. So I have the coil on plug wand on cylinder number 1, a 2000 amp clamp, and I was using the picoscope on this one, so I just threw a line across the screen, and they all look fairly even. And as you can see here, I have the battery voltage not AC coupled on this one, but I did magnify it because on a picoscope, you guys can't quite see, but in the down at the bottom where you select your channel heights, you can actually magnify them. So I magnified it to where it kind of matched. And I think I have another capture with it inverted. So here's a inverted math channel just to show that it looks almost identical to the amp clamp. So even if you don't have an amp clamp, you can do this test with just the DC volts and invert it and AC couple it. And then we got the coil unplug trigger there. Everything looks fairly even. Here's my coil unplug wand. This is an older one that came with my picoscope kit back when I bought it in 2013. It's a rigid wand with just a metal tip, and it has a rubber boot over the end. I don't remember if it came with that or if I threw that on there just because I was worried about spark jumping from a coil. But right over here we have the ignition coil, and I just have it laid on top of it. So real quick, easy way to get a sync channel on coil unplug systems. And then we have Kevin Beltwell. Is he in here today? I don't know if I saw him. I haven't seen him comment yet. So he had a 2008 STI. And I can't remember. We'll have to go through these. Random stubble? I think it's a stumble. Like a quick ignition shut off and then shortly rise after that. All the dash lights would come on and then go out. They already replaced the alternator. It's about 2 weeks old. So based off of his captures, this is more of the earlier waveforms that we were looking at with alternator ripple and some other stuff. But he was having a issue with that alternator charging and causing some ripple in there. Hey Bart, looks like you got the notification. Welcome. Now here's a case study that Doug posted up. This was a 2005 Ford Explorer 4-liter. He has several captures in here, including a relative compression check, as well as some AC ripple checks. So he was kind of going through all of the testing on this one because he had an issue. So he had battery plus, that was the red channel, alternator plus, both are AC coupled, green is an amp clamp, and blue is a sync on channel 1. I think that's for this waveform right here. So we can see his peaks are nice and even. I can't remember what green was already. I already forget. But we have his sync. He has the rulers up with numbers on there so we can see what cylinder is what. And then let me go to his other waveform. This is after startup. This was the AC ripple. He has a couple of measurements here. And if I can read this correctly, he has almost a volt of AC ripple from this from this vehicle. Francisco Diaz says, keep the sweater. And he just paid $5 for it.
Wow.
She's gonna fight you on that one. And then here was his regular startup. You know, his voltage drop, and then it evened out while he was cranking, and then the startup. And you can see that big rise in AC ripple. And Doug has a post later on, which we'll get to, that shows what was causing that ripple and what it took to fix it. And then we'll look at Bart's original one, and then he has another one down below in the comments where he changed a few things to make it a little bit cleaner. So this was blue is battery, AC coupled, not inverted. Red is the amp clamp. 5 millivolt or milliamps is 1 amp. So maybe he has a different clamp than what the preset is in the Pico. And then green is his sync on number 1. This is a GMC with a 6-liter LS engine. So we can see from the amp clamp that it looks fairly even, minor deviations. And there's another post in the group from today, I believe, that was another LS with some deviation as well. And we have a discussion on that. And then the voltage is not inverted. And I think in the later post, which let me close this and go down to it, Bart was actually able to invert that channel, get another capture, just to show you guys what that looks like. So now he has AC coupled and inverted on channel 1, and then his amp clamp here, and they line up almost identically. you know, makes you wonder sometimes, like, do I need the high amp clamp? But if you want to know what the actual amperage is, then you're going to need it. But for relative compression checking, DC volts will do you justice. And then we have his sink right here. And we already know it's a 6 liter, so it's an 8-cylinder engine. So if there was a low cylinder, and I can never remember the LS firing order off the top of my head. The old Chevys is 1843657 but I think these are like 1873. I can't remember. But you know, they threw me off when they changed the firing order. But everything looks even here, so we don't have to look it up. Yes, I inverted with a math channel on mine, and I'll pull up Picoscope on here and show you guys. 18726543. Paul, save the day. The math channel will do the math with the filter enabled. So if you have a filter on the base channel that the math is applying to, then the filter will transition with it. Yeah, because I ended up turning some filtering on one of my math channels because the math channel was so noisy that you couldn't really read it. So I had to turn some filtering on. And then this was Doug Wilson's follow-up. So all of that AC ripple right here was not caused by bad alternator diodes like we'd normally expect. And it's something that is worth mentioning because we may overlook it. Now, Doug said that his had a obvious noise that led him to find the issue. And here his after waveform. And do we have cursors on there? Let me go to this one. Maybe I can read it a little bit better. So 13.5, 13.2. So 300 millivolts of ripple afterwards. And the alternator was not changed. Doug did not change the alternator on this vehicle. Let me go back to the first picture. And maybe it's the second picture. So right here, you can see this little rub mark on the belt, or on the hose. The belt was too long and the alternator was slipping. So as that alternator speed was slipping and it was going up and down in speed, it was causing that excessive ripple. So keep in mind, if you're checking ripple, that it may not be just the diodes. And we noticed that even the engine RPM speed changes as each cylinder fires will cause a measurable amount of ripple. So good catch on that one, Doug. Josh says, I just keep changing the sample rates. Is that in order to get the waveform to be a little smoother? I know a lot of guys with the snap-on will actually put some more time on the screen to, if the waveform can't be filtered enough, they'll put some more time on the screen so that it lowers the sample rate so that the waveform is a little smoother and clearer, as long as you're not analyzing something that's happening very fast. And we have Paul Smith. This car was, we told him they had a water pump leaking, so they drove the car until it got really hot. Now it has superpower that turns blue fluid into yellow. And if you guys are not sure what that means, he's talking about the block test fluid that you put in a clear bottle and it has a little pump on the top. You stick it on the radiator and pump it up. If carbon dioxide's in the radiator, then it'll turn the blue fluid yellow, indicating combustion gas is present in the cooling system. But he was able to do his relative compression check, and let's see. He also has a pulse sensor in the coolant jug on this trace here. But his relative compression was fairly even, voltage and the amperage waveform. He has a sync channel here, and on this one we're a little unsure when we were discussing it in the chat, because every single cylinder is causing a pulse in the radiator. So we were unable to determine if it was just a single cylinder causing it or if all of them were kind of leaking, depending on how bad the gasket was. Pico 7 has an invert button. And see, I couldn't find invert in the 7, and that's probably just because I missed the button. I used to have presets in Picoscope 6, because I used to always download the software from Auto Nerds, and it had presets built in, and one of them was an inverted channel. Before I had to reinstall everything on my computer, and I just put the most up-to-date one from Picoscope's website, and it doesn't have all those presets. And then we have one more capture here. I think this is of it starting up and a real steep rise in coolant pressure there. But I don't think you got the job on this one correct, Paul. It says before they traded in, you just want to get another capture. So we don't know exactly what was going on there. But all the compression peaks were fairly even, but they all could have been leaking a little bit into the cooling system. Hans has one. He pulled all the ignition coils out of the vehicle to keep it from starting. So when you can't find a fuse real quick and easy to disable the ignition system, then if you can easily pull the coils, which Volkswagens, they normally just pop straight up unless the wiring harness is bolted down. Let me open this one up. This was on a Tiguan 2012. So you might have had a couple of Torx bolts holding down that harness. But in order to pull one coil on this engine, you pretty much have to pull them all. So it's just as easy to lift them all up. And once you lift them up, an inch or so, they're more than likely going to just fire and spark into the cylinder head and not into the spark plug. So it looks fairly even here. We have a ignition sync, which he was able to use just a paddle probe, I believe, or coil command on that coil, since the coil is still plugged in and it's still sparking. But he was able to get his sync going on here. Hey, Doug, how's it going? Josh says he locked down his workstation computer trying to download Pico 7. Yeah, the corporate computers kind of limit you on what you can do. Let me make sure there's no... Yeah, sync on the coil command. Now, I don't know on those particular engines. I know the 1.8, they had the coils grounded. There was a bolt on the valve cover that grounded them. I don't know if pulling that one bolt that would kill the ignition, so you couldn't even sync off of it hardly. So that wouldn't work. Scratch that idea. I was just thinking of I have a 1.8 liter engine in my sandrail. So I had to become a little bit familiar with the wiring. So this Michael Mack has his homework done on a 2007 Toyota Yaris. Relative compression using a 600 amp clamp connected to the negative terminal. Orange and the dark blue traces are connected to battery voltage. The Autel added the dark blue channel when he chose to invert. And I mentioned this as well in the chat that I'm very unfamiliar with the Autel scope. My brother has one, and I need to borrow it and become familiar with it. There are 2 grounds on the 4-pin coils. Yeah, it seems like one is attached to the head and then one's attached somewhere else. But you wouldn't want to kill ignition because then you couldn't set up your sync channel. So Michael Mack has his blue trace on cylinder 2 sync using the IGT circuit. Now, I'm just curious on why cylinder 2, because I assume it's a 4-cylinder one. So if you're still in here, let me know. This one, I think this is a zoomed out waveform, but this blue waveform is the inverted math channel for our voltage channel. Zoomed in, he has markers in here. So we have the IGT signal, which is the ignition trigger signal. If you guys don't know Toyota vehicles, Toyota has an IGF, which is the feedback. That is the signal that goes back to the computer to the coil saying, hey, I did my job, I fired. IGT is the computer triggering the coil saying, hey, you better fire. So we have 4 cylinders. They are relatively even. We have occasional spikes here and a little bit of noise. Even looking at the green trace here, the amperage trace, they all look fairly even. Make sure there's no, I gotta change my zoom here. No notes in there as well. Just Bart letting them know that there is an invert button on the Picoscope software. So like I said, when you guys are doing these tests, the easier the vehicle is to hook up and test it, especially when getting just known goods and getting used to using the scope, the better. For the video I filmed today that's coming out tomorrow, I used the the shop shuttle vehicle. It's a 2008 Toyota Highlander, because the stuff I needed to scope was super easy to get to. I was going to use my other Highlander, but I changed my mind because the newer one is a little bit easier. LaRue has one on a 98 GMC with the 5.7. So this one's going to be 1843657.2. Yellow is our relative compression trace, inverted and AC coupled. Blue is a pulse sensor at the purge valve fitting. Okay, so he's checking intake pulses. And then green, he has a pressure transducer in cylinder number 5, which will also work as a sync channel. Let me see here. Not sure if that is the one that's labeled. Let me read the labels again. Yellow is the RC. Okay. So here's our relative compression. Now it looks a little bit different in here. This almost looks like a pulse sensor, but the green trace is our sync, and it even though it doesn't have very much compression here, we see that we are missing a amperage peak right here in the yellow trace. There's just a really big dip, and there should be another hump right here. So we have a problem child cylinder right there, and then he's showing that it goes excessively into vacuum there as well. Here is the green trace, and this is going to be his voltage, AC coupled and inverted. So this is without the amp clamp. This is just the relative compression with the sync. Some nice even pulses. And then we have a big hole here. We're missing a pulse. So he knows that he has an issue. And if this is on cylinder 1, then it'd be 1843665. So that's why he stuck the pressure transducer into cylinder number 5. So this is probably what LaRue did first, just this quick check to identify which cylinder had the low compression, and then he performed additional testing after that. In case Hans doesn't answer that one, they are a little trickier to get a good waveform with my coil on plug wand. I have to kind of like maneuver around the coils on the Volkswagen, the 1.8 liter ignition coils, and even the 2 liter coils. They seem to be pretty well shielded. It's hard to get a good accurate waveform. I can get a tiny little pulse, but I can't read the ignition waveform on those very well. LaRue is suspecting a stuck open intake valve. And then Jonathan Hart had a question just about capturing known good waveforms. He wants to build a library. So if you guys are interested in that as well, there's a few good comments on here. Hans has a pretty big library and collection, so he gives some good tips on starting that database. And then we have B&A Tuning, 2010 Subaru Outback 2.5. You guys love the Subarus, but I have to warn you, the video that comes out tomorrow will be difficult to perform on most of these Subarus. The Subaru platform may not have the sensor we need, so we might have to find a different vehicle. This one here, week 5 relative compression test, 2010 Subaru 2.5. Customer complains of a rough idle after head gasket repair. So I'm assuming another shop did a head gasket and couldn't figure out why it was running bad, and now it's at this shop. Relative compression showed bank 1 slightly lower in amps than bank 2. So let me open up this picture. Oh, I'm going to have to blow this up a little bit. Actually, I think last time we just opened it up in a new tab. So it's a little hard to see here. But Subaru, since the firing order is 1, 3, 2, 4, 1 and 3 are on the same side of the engine. So we have 2 cylinders that are below this line. They have a line matching up with the peaks on these other 2 cylinders. And these 2 cylinders are a little bit low. So cylinder 1 and 3 are low. And then he gives an explanation. Let me get my zoom reset. He did a relative compression check, found that the one bank was lower than the other. A pressure transducer was used, and he found the exhaust valve opening was late on bank 1 compared to bank 2. Well, these Subarus only have one camshaft sensor, and that camshaft sensor is on the driver's side, which is bank 2. So they only monitor one bank of the engine, and the other camshaft was out of time. The one that's being monitored was in time, the other one was out of time. And I mentioned in here that I had one that we fought. It had air fuel ratio codes. It was like air fuel ratio, fuel trim, too rich or something. It was like a fuel trim bias code. And that was the first time I ever used a 5-gas analyzer. Actually, it was a 4-gas analyzer to verify that the air fuel ratio sensor was telling the truth. And that's when I found out, dug a little deeper, and found the timing belt was off. I think that one was off 2 teeth. So good catch on the Subaru. I always think it's weird when engines fire, that bank right after each other, because you'd think that you'd want the exhaust gases to kind of exit out of there a little bit. You'd think you'd want it to crossfire from one side to the other. Jira has a 2018 Corolla. Orange is the AC voltage at the battery, and I'm not sure, I don't think that one is inverted. Dark blue is the math channel with it inverted. Regular blue or light blue is the amp clamp, and IGT, the trigger signal, is his sync on cylinder number 1. And let's see, I'm looking for the cursor or the grid line here on the Autel. No cursors, but they all look relatively even just going across the screen here. It's nice when you have the grid lines turned on in the background, so you can get a rough idea without putting a measurement channel on there. I have them turned on my Zeus just for that purpose, because I don't have the ability of dropping down a measurement line. Is that a new song about Subaru engines? You're out of touch and I'm out of time? Let me see. So this one, he had a pulse sensor in it as well. He's doing some additional testing. He had another shop in there, 2007 RX350, came in with no coolant and the radiator was busted. So he was doing some testing like this to see if maybe he had some low cylinders or possibly some combustion gases leaking out into the cooling system. And he had a pulse sensor in the coolant reservoir, or into the radiator, even though the radiator was busted. And he had a little pulse right here, but I couldn't tell. It's almost a little square wave, just like our IGT pulse. So I'm wondering if that's just a little bit of noise bleeding over in the other channel. Forgive me if I butcher anyone's names, but Lenin or Lennon. We have a super late homework turn in, weeks 1 through 3. He has a 2018 RAV4 with a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder with 36,000 miles, OEM battery. He didn't have a high amp clamp, so he used a low amp clamp on the 2-volt scale. And then he had a question about what we're looking at in the waveform, because I didn't go real deep into that first video. I was trying to figure out what we were going to be doing, and I only showed the measurement at the lowest point of the waveform and not like where the engine starts cranking over. So I'll go over that a little bit right now. And what I discussed is, he was questioning, this one went down to 7.5 volts. Is that too low? Is this battery bad? It's a fairly... Well, thank you, Bart. Thanks for the super chat. I appreciate you guys. I mean, this is coming from you guys as well. If you guys weren't participating, I wouldn't be here. On this voltage, it dropped down to 7.5 volts. He's wondering how low is too low for that inrush voltage to drop. Well, I look at that voltage there, and most modules are going to be okay down to 7 volts or so. If it's a Jeep or a Chrysler product, especially from like the mid 90s to early 2000s, that may reset the computer. The computers weren't very robust. I don't think they had very good capacitors in there. They would reset if that voltage got too low, and then they'd have to relearn the idle. So they wouldn't idle very good if the battery was weak. But I'm okay with it as long as it doesn't go below 7 volts, for the most part. If I question it, I'll grab the battery tester just to make sure. And then our waveform, after that big drop, jumps up a little bit, and that's where the engine's actually cranking over. That's when it's spinning. Right here, it has to get the whole thing going. And now it's spinning, and our voltage jumped back up above 10 volts. I would say this battery is probably okay still. It could be a little bit low. That's where I'll grab the interstate of the snap-on tester and test it. I can't tell where we started from, but we're just above 12 volts. We might have been a little bit low on voltage to begin with. Chrysler with a problem? Yeah. Some Chryslers have problems. Now, one of the old school battery tests with a carbon pile tester, which most shops don't have, is you fully charge the battery. The battery has to be above 12.6 volts before you start the test. And then you put an amp clamp around the load tester and you crank the dial on that thing until you reach half of the cold cranking capacity of that battery. So if it's a 500 cold cranking amp battery, you ram that thing with 250 amps and you hold it for 15 seconds. I can do a video because we have one of them at the shop, an old, I don't know if it's a VAT 40 or something else, but 15 seconds, and it has a little flashing light, and then once you're done, the light goes solid. And after 15 seconds, if the battery voltage dropped below 9.6 volts, then that battery's bad. You can trickle charge it and retest it, but most of the time, we know if the battery's junk. And a lot of times you'll notice it right away. As soon as you crank up the amperage, it'll fall off within 5 seconds below that 9.6 volts. Okay, either the battery's completely dead and discharged and I didn't charge it before I tested it, or that battery is junk and doesn't have any capacity left. Don't use a carbon pile load tester on an AGM battery. Supposedly, the webbing inside of there that supports the mesh will die from carbon pile testing. I don't see how. That's what they say. But as soon as I click the starter on, it's going to pull 500 or 600 amps. So I don't see what the carbon pile is going to do. But that's what they say in the classes. Test the battery where it lives. Magic smoke, it might be. So if we were able to crank the engine over for 10 or 15 seconds, then we'd get a better idea of the health of that battery. Because if it starts dropping closer and closer to 9.6 volts as we're cranking it, and it can't maintain above that, then more than likely that battery's dead. So on the vehicles that have clear flood mode, that's a great time to hold your foot to the floor, give it that long crank, and then let off the gas and let it fire up, and then you can get your charging system voltage in there as well. So that was week 1. Week 2, we added in the extra traces for voltage drop testing. On this one, he jumped up quite a bit, over a voltage drop at the beginning, and then it kind of levels out in here around 300 millivolts. So that's kind of on my top side of what I find allowable. But earlier discussions, we were talking about how small the battery cables are on the modern vehicle. So we may have to adjust our known good and known bad references. And then this one, he was using the low amp clamp, and that's why we see this pattern kind of jump up and then it flattens out. That was the limit of what that amp clamp could put out. That's the maximum that it could run. Because even if we went off the screen for the snap-on scope, the scaling, the line would have continued and then just chopped off. There would be an empty space right here. So that's the maximum that the amp clamp can do. And the scaling, like right there, it says 1.8. I'm guessing this line would be 180 amps. So this one, I would say the amperage is a little high for a little 4-cylinder engine, but I haven't tested one of those vehicles recently, so I don't have a reference of what's good on that engine. But normally, like 120 to 150 on a 4-cylinder engine is all the amperage you're going to get. And then he has the solenoid command in blue. We see the decay over here as the starter winds down. So homework 1 through 3 done and caught up. Just a little rain. We had lots of wind and rain today, so I wasn't sure if the live stream was going to happen. Every once in a while, the power will go out. And we have Jason Chavez getting in his homework. Almost late. We have another Subaru. And we have a pretty nice capture here. So he's using the paddle probe just on an ignition wire. So it'll pick up even on a spark plug wire. If you only have the paddle probe and you don't have the ignition pickups that clamp onto the wire, then use the probe. Just lay it on the wire and go with it. So he has 4-cylinder engine from that previous Subaru that had the firing order on it. We know it was it 1342, I think, or was it 1324? I know it was 13. But all these compression peaks look fairly even. There's some minor deviation, but nothing to be concerned about here. And then we see the spark happen twice. And I explained in the chat that this is a good waveform. You can see what's happening. We have high kilovolts here. That's because that cylinder number 1 is on compression. But it's a waste fire system, so it's going to fire that spark plug on the exhaust stroke. Since there's no compression, it's going to be very easy for that spark plug to fire. So our kilovolts are going to be low, and then on compression they're going to be high, low, high, low, high. So that's an easy way on the waste fire system to identify it. And I believe that's how Saturns identify misfires on those early 1.9 liter engines. They'll set a cam sensor code, but they don't have a cam sensor. It's an artificial code. The ignition module looks at the inductive kick or something from the ignition coils and determines where cylinder number 1 is, and that's how they do the firing order. So if somebody, or not the firing order, the sequential fuel injectors. So somebody switches the spark plug wires on that, it gets confused, and it starts firing the injectors out of time. But there's only 2 of those on the road, so we don't have to worry about it. And then he has his settings that he was using. He just wanted to make sure that his settings were good. And a picture of his Subaru. Oh, you're missing a push pin. You're missing a push pin that holds the washer fill thing to the radiator support right there, Jason. We have 5 push pin assortments, and we seem to never have the right push pin for a Subaru. And he put a description in here on his file that I made him do it. Lots of wind. Well, it was coming from the west. The wind was coming from the west, Hans. So I'm assuming that it came from Utah. David has one. It's a 4Runner 4-liter 2005. Yellow is the battery. Green is cylinder number 1. Red is the current clamp. It had codes in there for cylinder 2, 4, and 6 misfires. Let me see which scope he was using. Someone asked that question in here. It's a USB Autoscope 4. And I kind of like it. It looks like it has some nice clean waveforms. I'm not familiar with it at all, but it looks like a pretty capable scope. It's got nice detail. It's got lots of measurements on the side. But you can see here his compression peaks. We got a trigger right here for cylinder number 1. There's low, high, low, high, low, high. So half of the cylinders are taking less amperage. And if we're just looking at the amperage scale, I would say about half as much energy to compress the air in that cylinder. So maybe we have half the air charge, and it's very repetitive. And the firing order, I think he's posted it in here somewhere. Maybe not. I thought he did, but he was suspecting or assuming that they have a jumped timing chain, and one bank at that engine is now out of time, and it's causing the compression to be low on all those cylinders. Now on the 4-liter, I've never seen a timing chain issue, but you never know, depending on the service history and all that, or if the variable valve timing was stuck. Surprisingly, I don't think I've ever done a variable valve timing solenoid or actuator on one of these 4-liters either. But good capture. And they don't all have to be known bad. You can get the known goods, but it's nice when you have one that comes in the shop and you hook up the scope to do the test, and you're like, man, there's the issue. So now does the customer want us to dig in deeper? Because at this point, you either have to go in cylinder. If you don't have a pressure transducer, then possibly pull the valve cover off and actually inspect the cam timing. And then Howard has one. It's a 94 Ram 2500 with the 5.2. So this is still going to have a distributor, but I'm assuming he's tied on to cylinder number 1. And sometimes when you have a distributor system, the secondary lead that's on the plug wire and not on the coil wire, you'll get this falling waveform. You get that big spike in there, and then there's a little bit of energy that slowly dissipates in that plug wire. And we can see a little bit of noise from each of the other firing cylinders. But his voltage here, he was on a 10-volt scale, and we couldn't see quite enough detail in that capture to identify if a cylinder had low compression or not. And I believe he gets another capture here in the comments. So, don't be afraid to ask questions. Howard said, hey, here's what I'm at. It doesn't look quite right. What do I need to change? So several guys, I think Daryl commented, a couple other guys commented. There's normally someone in the group that can see what's going on. As long as we can see your settings, we can give advice on getting the right waveform. So a lot of good guys in here. So here we can see all of his cylinders are fairly even. Cylinder number 1, Chrysler also 1843572. They write it on the intake manifold, so you don't have to remember it. So we'd go across, and if we had a low cylinder, we'd be able to identify it. But all that looks pretty good. You're hissing at me. Oh, and he has another one here, zoomed in a little bit further. And he changed his time scale to a shorter time base and then zoomed out so that we had some additional detail. I think that was one of the other comments on there. And then Richard Cook has a 93 Acura Integra 1.8 dual overhead cam. First time to participate in the group. So he's jumping straight in with the week 5 homework. He has channel 1 connected battery post. Channel 2 is the amp clamp on battery negative. Channel 3 is the inductive pickup on cylinder number 1 plug wire. He has fuel injectors disabled. So voltage, inverted and AC coupled. I'm assuming it says amps. Am I reading that wrong? But I'm just looking at the channel labels, and the red says amps and the blue says volts. But he's got arrows pointing the other way. But since they're almost identical, we'll go with it. It won't matter much. Minor deviations in the compression. We have a sync channel. I don't see the firing order listed on here, but we don't need it because everything looks fairly good. Now, Pico does have a built-in test in the Pico diagnostic software to where you can do a relative compression check. And if you have a pressure transducer installed in one cylinder, it will actually it'll give you a close or rough number of what the compression is in all of the cylinders based off of the percentage of difference in the amperage compared to what the compression was in the cylinder you're testing and the amperage of that cylinder at that time. It's not always accurate, so don't trust it 100%. It's a good software, but make sure you verify. Bob Newman going for another A+, using the ATS scope again. We have his Chevy Cavalier 2.2 liter engine. He removed the spark plug from one cylinder just so he could get a waveform that shows a low compression cylinder. So you can make your own known bad waveforms while you're experimenting with this. If you don't have a vehicle that's bad to test and you're sitting around on a Saturday or Sunday and you're like, well, I really want to learn this test, pull a spark plug out. That'll make it to where you have low compression and you can see the issue. So he's got a 600 amp clamp and ignition sync on cylinder 2. So we can see right here that we have a low cylinder. So whenever you have a low cylinder, the next cylinder on the amperage is normally a little high. It doesn't mean that this cylinder has extra compression or anything like that. It's just the engine has to spend a little more effort to get going again. But we have a low cylinder, and then 3 normal ones and a low cylinder, and then we have his cylinder 2 firing line right here. So we could identify what it was based off the firing order, which is 1342. So if we have 2 here, 1 is our low one, 3, 1342. Man, I can count. 1, 3, which is the missing compression. 4, 2, and he has it labeled here. Starter is using less current on cylinder 3 due to low compression. Starter is using more current on cylinder 4. That's the next cylinder in the firing order, just because it's slowing down due to there being compression and causing a higher peak. And you'll see that amplified a little bit more in the AC coupled voltage trace versus the amp trace. The amp trace won't be quite as much of a peak on that second pulse compared to the AC coupled. Typically. Oh, Pico says the channel labels are labeled correctly. It was labeled wrong on the screen. I'm guessing that was on this one here. Yeah, relative compression voltage on the blue trace. We've all done it. You get in there to start putting notes on it, and you slap the arrow going the wrong way. And Grant Baker says that he did not have his homework done this week. Dang it! But that's okay, because 2 weeks ago, Grant Baker super chatted $6 for a queso fund. So I think that gives him like some extra credit. It's always good to bribe the teacher.
Oh,
with food. Josh Myers. Now, Josh works at Kia. This is a 2016 Genesis Coupe 3.8. Firing order is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I love it when 6 cylinders have that firing order.
Was it all the way in order?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Me too, then I don't have to listen to you stutter over it 4 times.
Making fun of me. Now, I have yet to see a Hyundai Genesis or an actual Genesis branded vehicle in the shop. Uh-oh. My computer's showing these captures wrong. But we can see what's going on here. Let me zoom in. They all look relatively even. Oops. I'm going to draw a vertical line here, but we have a sync. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they all look fairly even there. We'll go back and look at his notes and see if there was a problem with this vehicle. I don't see anything commented here, so it probably didn't have any major issues. And we can see here, oops, I always forget to open it in a new tab before zooming in. We have the grid line turned on, and they all line up evenly on that grid line. So all the pulses are even. And Josh, was this using your picoscope, the one that we thought was damaged? Hopefully, because that looks like a good waveform capture, which means that it's all up and running well. Sweet. That proves that it's working good. And then Peekaboo, Jonathan, has a Porsche 944 with a 2.5. There's a couple of these sitting in a storage lot down the street from me. Both of them have busted out rear windows and they have tarps over the back. I think these are the ones that are supposed to have that big curved rear window. You're the one that had it in your shop, so let me know if that's the case. We have cylinder number 1 sync, 4-cylinder engine. Everything looks fairly even. I mean, that one there was a little low, but not anything drastic. Shows us a picture of the engine. So that has a distributor driven right off the front of the camshaft. And I think he mentioned last week that he had a Porsche that he was going to do a test on. And I instinctively assumed that the engine was going to be in the back of it. I forgot that they ran these engines. So we got some jumper leads hooked up. We got some grounds. Probably doing some additional testing as well. I'm not sure. Is that the injector down there? Or is the injector up here? It's under the rail there. Just browsing through the pictures. I don't get to see these vehicles. Looks like one injector connector. So we got an injector unhooked as well. Pico can let us know what was going on with this one. Yeah, I don't have them this clean in my area. There's just a couple of junkers that drive around. Oh, Josh Meyer says no problems. It's his car. And I don't know if those have common issues. I know that some guys are having issues in the aftermarket getting access to be able to program them. That is the extent of what I've heard for the Genesis platform. Doug Wilson, before and after captures from a few months ago, he had a timing issue on one bank. So we can see here he has a couple of low pulses, a high pulse, a low pulse, a couple of high pulses, a low pulse, a high pulse, a couple of low pulses, and that's because the firing order isn't quite even and it goes from bank to bank. And then afterwards, after replacing the timing chain assembly or the timing chain cassette, I can't remember which one he said, it has some nice even pulses here. And I don't know if this is a before and after on the compression, but we'll cover some compression waveforms a little later on. But you can see that the waveforms don't quite overlay the same. One was a little more retarded than the other, or a little more advanced than the other one. And I don't know if this was a bank to bank when it had the issue. And realistically, you should have identical compression on both sides. But as you can see, it's a very, very minor difference here. But our peaks up here, the compression is quite a bit different. And on the relative compression check, it showed up pretty drastically. Randall had one with the Autel scope. He was asking some suggestions, and he was seeing some differences as well. Once again, I'm not familiar with the Autel scope enough to know how to do the filtering and stuff, but if I saw this on the Snap-on or the Pico, I would turn on some filtering. So NC Basson said that this one is his. I'm assuming the waveform I'm currently on. I don't think we have a big delay today. But yeah, I would turn some filtering on for that capture. And then we were talking about the little bit of differences in our compression peaks. We had a couple of low cylinders. And one thing that I did a video on checking out an engine from the junkyard that I had dropped off. I was getting ready to put it in a Impala, but it was an LS engine. And I had the valve covers off. I wanted to check compression, make sure everything was good. But one thing I noticed while I was cranking it over on the floor is as I would crank it up and then stop cranking it, my rocker arms would start moving. The lifters were actually collapsing just sitting there. So ever since that video, whenever I do a relative compression check on a Chevrolet, especially the LS platform, I try to crank it over for at least 10 seconds to make sure that all the lifters are pumped up all the way, because you could get a slight difference in your compression peaks. But we have a capture here, so we're able to sync it up. Even though there's a lot of noise here, you can still see the difference or the deviation of compression. And he said, don't bash me. If there's ever any bashing going on, the person is either going to get kicked from the group or put on post approval before they can do it again. I think everyone in here is pretty good people and are more than willing to give help. Sometimes it may be constructive criticism, but as long as it's not, name calling, I think we'll be okay. But I think everything should proceed fairly well without bashing. John Webb has one Tacoma 4-liter V6. He has the circuit opening relay removed. If you don't know Toyotas, the circuit opening relay is the fuel pump relay. And then he has a high amp clamp on the negative battery cable. And sync is set on cylinder number 5 IGF signal. His voltage scale was off, but that's okay. As long as we have a trigger, it doesn't matter how tall our trigger is. As long as we can see the trigger, then that's all we need. This, you could zoom in a little bit on that, but it looks like a fairly clean capture. And I don't think you answered me, John, if you're in here still, but I'm just looking at the screen and it looks like the Apollo screen, but I'm assuming that it's the Triton D8, just because the color scheme is different than my Modus. Jira said, yeah, I made a lie. We already covered your waveform, and it is a Triton. So I was suspecting that just because of the waveform. Now my Apollo D9 has a slightly different color, but it's along the same grayscale with kind of like that bare metal background. And then he did label those too as well for our firing order. Since he was synced up on number 5, he went back to cylinder number 1 and went across the screen. And then I need to refresh the page because we probably have a couple of new submissions since we started the live stream. Theo, 42 minutes ago, so good thing I refreshed it. We have a trigger and we have a current waveform. It could be voltage. Let me see here. Battery voltage inverted, number 1 ignition coil signal. So I would probably change the scaling a little bit to something that blows it up a little bit more. It looks like you're on a 5-volt scale. It could be per division, but I see 0 to -5 here. You probably go to +5 up there. But blowing that up a little bit will make the compression irregularities a little more obvious. But they look fairly even based on his measurement lines. And then we have a trigger to line everything up. That's it. I don't... Oh, Jiro said he works with John and that it's a Triton. His Modus is in for repairs. I haven't had any issues with my Modus. So what kind of issue was he having? It looks like it's AC coupled. Yeah, it's following the 0 line through the screen. So it's probably AC coupled. That's why we could probably change that scaling. I don't see the setting screen here. I think this is the H scope, if I remember correctly, the H scope app. But we could definitely blow that up a little bit. Now, Daryl sent me a text saying that he was going to go outside and get a waveform. So I'm going to refresh one more time here. No, it didn't pop up. Daryl, you better hurry up because we've gone through them all. Trying to think, there was another question in the group that I wanted to address. I think we're done with the waveforms. Let me open up the Picoscope software real quick. Of course, my computer wants to open Picoscope 7, which I'm unfamiliar with.
I'll keep refreshing to wait for Daryl.
Okay. And let me switch spots with the Picoscope software so that you guys can see what I see. We were talking about inverting and some math channels. So I'm just going to open up the channel settings here. So now they have an invert button. If you're using Picoscope 6, they didn't have an invert button, or I don't remember them having an inverted button. But I'm going to turn that on, and you can see that my blue trace here, now my trigger's way off, my blue trace flipped upside down. So it's going across here, it jumps up, and then the inductive kick on this injector, I'm assuming, drops way down and then levels back out. That's with invert on and invert off. Let me see if I can open up Picoscope 6 to show you guys how I invert a channel with Picoscope. I'm pretty sure I have it. But maybe I don't have it installed. I got the file to install it. Okay, it'll only take a second to install. We'll just install it real quick. Because I normally use a math channel for the Picoscope 6 software. Let me jump back to the chat. So Daryl ran into some technical difficulties. He said he texted me. My phone's on silent. There it is. Says he's going to miss out on this one. Dang it. A math channel.
You can go buy one from who's selling them?
Yeah, Doug Wilson and I believe Jason were both selling waveforms a couple weeks ago. So So if you need to buy one, see if they're on the market. Yes, Hans makes a point. On the Snap-on, if you want to invert the voltage waveform, you can just switch your channels around. Now, I ran into an issue, and it kind of scared me for a second. I had my Modus plugged in to the OBD2 connector, and because the battery was low, and I went, maybe Daryl can answer this question. I went to the scope, and I was doing exactly that, and I was getting really, really weird results. And then I remembered that I was plugged into the data link connector, and it kind of scared me because I'm like, okay, is the ground shared between the scope and the battery or the data link connector in there? And am I actually frying the internals of my Modus? So I quickly unplugged from the battery and then didn't do that test until I unhooked from the data link connector. Daryl, shed some light if you know the inner workings of the Snap-on scope enough to let me know. Jason was selling a Toyota. Yeah, he had a listing for like, I think it was like an 03 Toyota Camry. Now, the video for tomorrow, as long as everything turned out good, I was able to get everything set up with the U-scope. I still don't have a lot of experience with the U-scope, but I'm trying. I'm trying to get some captures with it. Hans says it wouldn't work with any scope with a shared ground. Okay, so Picoscope 6 should be installed now. We'll get it running with a demo device. Okay, so here we got all kinds of stuff going on. We need a trigger to smooth it out a little bit. And up here on Picoscope 6, your channel settings, you click on the A for channel A, and it has what probe you're using. And there's some built-in probes. There's a library and loaded, which I don't have anything in here because this is just regular Picoscope software. But I don't have an invert option built into here. Now, I don't know if you can do a custom probe easily to do an inverted option. And then I don't know if that's possible, but it's really easy to do if you go to Tools at the top and hit Math Channels. And then it's built in as a default, invert channel A, and just hit OK. So now, that one's over here. They're a mirror image of each other. So even though with Picoscope 6 I don't have the built-in plugin to do an inverted waveform on the capture, I have the math channel. And then if you don't want, let me stop the screen. If you don't want to see the uninverted channel, just right click on the screen, go to channels, and I can turn off channel A. And now all I'm left with is my inverted waveform. So you can get rid of that extra channel that's just, clouding things up. And then let me go back to Tools, Math Channels, and we'll turn that one off. And you can create your own. Like when I was doing a voltage drop, I actually needed channel A and channel D, I believe. So I just went to Create, and I went channel A minus channel D. Next, it was black. I think I overrode this, and I wanted like just 2 volts or something. Because voltage drop, I didn't expect it to be very high. Minimum, I guess, would be -2. Finish, and then it adds that one to your library, so I can turn that on. Now, I probably won't have anything show up because I don't have channel D activated. But if I did, I don't know if anything's pre-programmed in here. Gives me all kinds of noise. We need more voltage on that waveform. So this is giving me a really, really goofy waveform because I'm taking A minus D, which is an irrelevant measurement, but it's just giving me some funky stuff going on here. So you can create your own custom math channels within Picoscope 6. I'm a little less familiar with Picoscope 7, but I know they have a button here for math channels. Since we already have the invert feature, we don't have to necessarily invert our waveform unless we wanted to. I think is that filter? No. There was a lot more options that I noticed in the Picoscope 7 software that seemed a little confusing to me because I haven't studied it in depth. But I don't see an invert option on there. Can we invert after the capture has been taken? I guess that's a better question. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't let me invert that afterwards. Let me read the comments just to make sure. I took up all Daryl's time helping me. So I'll be dipped. Yeah, so between those two softwares, that's how you do the inverted. Now, I kind of like being able to do the inversion afterwards, but I'm sure that there is a way with the Picoscope 7 software. And Hans changed his channel D to black so that he can actually see it. And see, mine wasn't nearly as neon colored as what you had going on the other day. I mean, it's a little harsh on the eyes, that yellow, but it's more of like a baby food yellow instead of that neon yellow that somebody had posted the other day. And I think, where's even the settings on this? As you can see, I don't use Picoscope 7 very often. But channel labels, yeah, it's probably in the preferences somewhere to change that color. Math channel, just a -A. Okay, let me go math channel. It probably has to be that A. Hit next, color black, finish. Okay, there we go. There's our waveform. So Chad Coleman nailed it. Math channel, just -A, and we are good to go. That's how we can invert it afterwards. Turn that channel off. And we have this black channel that is the inverse of our blue channel. So since I've been focusing so much with familiarizing myself on the Snap-on platform, I haven't dived into the Picoscope 7 yet. Can you change the background to black? I don't know. Hans says yes. I know the Snap-on you can change it to between day and night, and it's defaulted on night mode with the black background, but you can change it to a white background like this. Let me see if Picoscope. Oh, did I close the other one?
Nice background.
It's in the preferences. And I know there's some options for printing as well, to where you can change some of the settings to do like a grayscale print, so your yellow channel doesn't get washed out in the printer. But let me jump back over here. And let me know if you guys have any questions. I'll refresh the page over here one more time, make sure that nobody has any late submissions. Since Daryl, we're not waiting on Daryl now that we know that that he gave up. Technical difficulties. Just what he chose. Okay. The importance of inverting the waveform for the ignition sync, it's not important. I was just demonstrating how to invert the waveform. Now, if sometimes ignition waveforms should be inverted, because by default, most vehicles with a single coil and plug wires, you're going to have to invert the waveform for it to show up how they are in all the books. Otherwise, it'll be upside down. So ignition waveforms you will invert, and then if it's a waste fire system, one side of the engine you're going to invert, the other side you're going to run in a positive method. No, I'm not. I'm not keeping. Am I a pirate? I got the pirate ship. Not keeping the sweater. We'll return it to its rightful owner once this live stream is done. Um, and if you're using the snap-on scope and you have the secondary ignition adapter, the SIA 2000, it connects to all of the spark plug wires, and there's options in the snap-on scope for which cylinders are negative fired and which ones are positive fired, and it'll try to line all those up for you. So sometimes you do need to know which cylinders are being fired negatively and which ones are positive. Jason, it looked like your waveform was spiking positive, but that preset for the ignition is already going to flip it to a negative waveform. So if you were scoping the other side of the engine, cylinder 1 or 3, you may have to click that invert button to uninvert it so that they all look the same. If that made sense. I know that was a lot of flip-flopping. A pirate peacock. Did anyone else have any questions now that I'm actually looking at the chat and I can keep up with it before we wrap this one up? I don't see anything else in here that I missed. So I'm going to wrap this one up. I appreciate everyone for joining in. I appreciate all of the waveforms you guys have submitted. If you guys quit posting them, then we'll quit doing the Saturday night stream. But as long as you keep them up, I will try to always come on Saturday night, and we'll have the discussions, because sometimes you guys may not be comfortable doing the test, or something doesn't make sense, and something will be clarified during the live stream. But if you're struggling to get a good waveform capture while you're trying to perform that test, post up what you were able to get, or even what your question is, and myself or somebody else in the group will try to steer you in the right direction to making that waveform look proper.
I've got something to say.
Valerie has something to say.
Good job to Pico, because I saw in the group that he was upgraded to Rising Star.
Peekaboo, you are upgraded to a Rising Star.
Good job.
Good job. And thanks for helping me the other night. I actually had to well, that was Josh. Thanks, Josh, for helping me the other night. I had to call Josh on a Kia question as well. Now, I don't know if Josh is being upgraded or not, but we have several that have posted so many waveforms in the group that you're getting bumped up to the Rising Star. We have tons of new members from this last week, especially. Some of the new members have already tried catching up on the waveforms, or posting new waveforms. I think some of them just joined today, so they haven't really had time. So I expect to see a large jump of participation in the group. I appreciate you guys. Tomorrow's waveform is hopefully going to be a simple one for you guys to do. If it's an easy vehicle to access the stuff we're scoping, I don't want to give out too much, then it should be less than a 5-minute test. If you're familiar with your scope and the components are easy to access, I would say that it's a 2-minute test. So really simple, single channel. So no matter what scope you have, you'll be good to go. Thanks, guys, and I will see you guys next time.